magnificent job with this public service. I think we studied about 2 or 3 years ago, and I think it was our pretty good judgment that we reach about 2 million people that live in Alabama. And I think probably the People's Law School is the best public service for legal organizations in our state. So I think we've done a whole lot, and the idea is to help the average person understand our system, understand what it's about, understand what they can do and what they can't do, and how to get help if you don't know what you can do. So I think People's Law School deserves a real plus in your mind for public service. Tonight, Alan and the People's Law School has asked me to speak to you about Alabama workers' compensation. It's something I do every day. I enjoy it. It's something that I've been doing for many years. I want to do it from the perspective of an injured employee. I could talk to you about from the perspective of a insurance carrier. But let me talk to you about the injured employee and what he faces and what the hurdles are that he needs to overcome while he's in his injured condition and improving. Now, I guess you may know this, but when you're injured at work, your exclusive remedy, in other words, the only thing you can do in relationship to your employer is seek workers' compensation. You're not entitled to sue them for negligence or for a tort of some type. All you're entitled to have and to receive is compensation. Let's just kind of go through what an employee that's injured at work faces. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have known people that have been injured at work. Some of them are pretty minor and they go back to work and there's no problems. Some of them result in significant medical care. I know there's some nurses out here in the back. They're as familiar with this as I am because they work in it each and every day. And they could tell you some of the same pitfalls that I'm going to speak about. Their perspective is working with injured people every single day. And I'll tell you, they do a wonderful job, and I'm proud they're here at People's Law School. But usually when somebody is hurt, that's somebody's husband, that's somebody's friend, that's somebody's brother, that's usually a breadwinner. It's usually somebody who's bringing the paycheck home to pay the mortgage, to buy the food, to put the gas in the car. That's usually who gets hurt, all right? And usually it's through no fault of the person that is injured. In other words, he's at work, something hits him, or he falls because there's oil or grease on the floor, or he gets injured in numerous ways. It's usually not his fault, but he's injured. He's entitled to workers' compensation. He's out of work most every time, especially when these nurses are involved, and his paycheck has been cut off. So when that happens, he's got an hour of need. In other words, this is a person whose life has changed very, very dramatically just in the space of a few days normally. All right, so what does he do? He counts on his employer, and more than that, he counts on the workers' compensation insurance carrier to do the right thing, to treat him right, to pay the benefits that he's entitled to receive, to pay them on time, to get the medical care that he's supposed to have under workers' compensation. He trusts them. And you know, the great majority of workers' compensation people and employers, they're honest, they're ethical, they do the right thing, they send their employees that are injured to the job, that are injured on the job, they send them to the doctor, they pay the medical bills as they're required to do, they pay them compensation while they're off work. You know, this is the only protection that an injured employee has, is benefits from workers' compensation. Now, but you know, there are some carriers, some insurance carriers, and there's some employers whose motive is to maximize the profit for the company, and they see an injured employee as a liability. He's no longer able to produce. He's no longer able to come to work every day. He's no longer able to make the company make money. Now he's a liability. And so they weigh this in terms of profit motive versus what's best for the injured employee. And some of them a rare smaller percentage, choose the profit motive. That is their motive in terms of how they approach an injured employee. And as I said to you, the majority of people and the majority of companies do not do that. They're honest and ethical, and they do the right thing by injured employees. But there are those, and I think y'all have probably dealt with people yourselves that you felt were unscrupulous in terms of how they did things. They didn't treat you right. You didn't feel like you were getting what you should have gotten. That's what happens to workers' compensation injured employees that I see. All right? Now, what happens to people like that? Let me describe somebody to you that's been injured, where the company decides to maximize the profit to the disadvantage of the injured employee. First off, he's not getting his checks on time. His mortgage on his house probably gets in arrears. You know, his car payment probably gets in arrears. If the company's really tough on him, what they do is they terminate his health insurance because he's no longer at work. He's no longer able to pay his portion of the health insurance. And so if his wife has diabetes and is counting on that health insurance every month, she no longer has health insurance that will pay her medication. So that's another tremendous loss. And I see these nurses back in the back, they see this thing all the time. They really do. And so an injured employee goes from doing well, having a nice home, he's the breadwinner, he's taking care of his family. He goes from that, and in just a few short weeks, as soon as his savings is used up, he goes to being delinquent on his mortgage, his house is in trouble, perhaps he's going to lose his house. And so in today's environment, the political environment that we see, my experience is that the insurance carriers, the pharmaceutical companies, the big corporations, they pretty much have a big say in what happens to us. In other words, I think corporations have more power than the individual by far. And so when a company more or less abuses that power by failing to pay workers' compensation benefits on time, by failing to send the man to the medical care that he deserves, what's he to do? He should go and see an attorney. You know, that's exactly what he should do. He should not be afraid to do that. That's exactly what people like myself do and other people like Mr. Brinkley. So the role of a lawyer like myself or those that come before you is to stand up to these powerful corporations that are not doing the right thing by someone that's been injured, and to be sure that the playing field is level, to be sure that the person gets benefits that he should receive. Let me give you some statistics. These I think are pretty important statistics, and it kind of shows you what lawyers for injured employees can do if you get one. First off, only 30 to 40% of the people in Alabama that are injured at work ever go see an attorney. So that means more than 50% never seek legal counsel for these serious back injuries or serious injuries where you're off work for several weeks. All right. But for those that go and seek the advice of an attorney, they receive from 3 to 5 times the compensation of a person that doesn't have an attorney. So it's pretty obvious that an attorney can be effective, especially when you get in the circumstance where the benefits are not paid, the medical care is not provided, and so I would encourage you, if you have a serious injury, now we're not talking about a bruised ankle or something like that, but if you have a serious injury, to treat yourself right, to treat your family right, to be sure your family's not endangered, I encourage you to at least get some legal advice and see what could be done for you. Statistically, you'll end up with 3 to 5 times your benefits compared to the person who doesn't get an attorney. And remember, more than 50% of the people never seek an attorney in workers' compensation injuries. So Now, I think that's pretty important. And what you're really doing is you're kind of leveling the playing field. I've had a lot of people ask me this, is what do you do, George? What is your, what do you do every day? What is your job? And I really have a lot of jobs, but let me tell you some of the jobs that I like, okay? And it involves workers' compensation and other people that have needs similar to this. First, we protect the public. We help people that are members of the public gain the protection that they are entitled to receive. Protecting the public is probably our #1 job, and I think that we do it well. People that come here to People's Law School, many of them are similar to myself. They do it and do it well, and they love what they do. We stand between an injured employee and disaster. In other words, someone has come to my office on occasion. Their house has been delinquent in terms of payments. They haven't gotten the back surgery that they're supposed to get. Their car has been repossessed, and they don't know what in the heck to do. Well, many times I've been able to jump in there and help the people get their check restarted or get their medical care authorized, and it protects them, and it not only just protects the person themselves, it protects their entire family, because everybody suffers when the breadwinner or some major member of a family is injured. All right? And Alan talked about me going to church. I try to do it most often. I have learned there that if we help those that are struggling, that's the right thing to do. And I enjoy doing that. It's what workers' compensation attorneys do almost every day. People who come to see me are struggling. They've got problems, they've got injuries, they've got problems paying their bills. And so to help a struggling family makes me feel very, very good, and I love to do that. And I do it every day, really. I had a guy ask me one time, George, if you weren't a lawyer, what would you do? If you could choose again, what would you do? What would you become? Well, I wouldn't want to be a farmer, because that's too much hard work, And I thought to myself, I said, what would I do? I cannot think of a thing that I would rather do than do what I actually chose to do. And so I think if I chose again, I would choose to be a lawyer, because I've met many thousands of good people. I've been able to help a lot of good people. And I think I've used my life well, and I'm really pleased with what I do. So the question that was presented to me, I hadn't thought about it until he asked that, but I'd be pleased to choose the same thing again. And I think it makes me feel good in my mind to know that I'm able to help people. But let's talk about the fundamental roles of what I do. When somebody comes into my office, they're hopeless sometimes. So I give them some hope. I tell them that there are rules and there are laws that will protect them. I give them some strength. I mean, I know how to go to the courthouse. I know how to get a court order that gets a surgery authorized. I know how to give them some protection. So those are the kind of things that I do when somebody comes into my office and they don't think they've got a fair shake. And that's really the bottom line. I'm not trying to get more than they should get under the law, but I definitely don't want to get less. I want to be sure that the playing field is level. I want to be sure that these people get a fair shake for what has happened to them. And that's all anybody can ask. You can't ask for more, and you'll never get more, So, but if you get a fair shake, you'll be in pretty good shape. And so that's some of the things we do. Insurance companies charge giant premiums to these big companies, to insure against workers' compensation injuries. So it's pretty discouraging to me as a professional when I see a big company refuse to pay a surgery that should be authorized without question, or refuse to pay benefits, weekly benefits, knowing that it's putting the financial squeeze on this man and his family. So I try to hold that insurance company to the duty that they agreed to accept when they took that premium. I do my dead level best to hold them accountable for what they promised to do, which is pay benefits under Alabama law. You know, these are things that we do. I tell my clients this, that in a courtroom where you have a fair judge, and we have magnificent, great judges in our county and really throughout Alabama, that in a courtroom, you're as powerful, meaning the injured employee, you are as powerful as the mightiest CEO of the biggest corporation in the United States. You know, think of that. In a courtroom, an injured employee who comes in there with an attorney and who applies the law in Alabama is as powerful as the mightiest CEO of the biggest corporation that we read about, Exxon or General Motors or whomever. So, you know, these people, they have some rights. They should enforce their rights. 30 or 40% of them get lawyers. The rest of them, what happens to them? I would say they get less benefits than they probably otherwise should receive. You know, we try to stand up for people that are abused like that. We stand up to powerful companies. We try to make corporations accept the responsibility that they agreed to provide. You know, in the last 5 years, I've been really surprised at major corporations and what some of them are guilty of. Now, again, most of them do right, they're honest, and they're trustworthy, and they do the right thing. But you know, in the last 5 years, we've read of companies that cooked the books. We've read of companies that stole the pensions of the employees. We've read of companies that swindled the stockholders. We've read just down here in Katrina, around New Orleans and South Alabama and Mississippi. We read of insurance carriers that are not paying for those houses that are blown away on some technical argument they put in their policy. They're saying that, oh, sure, you got some damage, but your damage didn't come from wind, it came from water. You know, I mean, they had 150-mile-an-hour wind down there, you know, and they want to argue with someone that lost their entire house that under your policy you get no benefits because the damage might have come from water, which is an exclusion, and it never could come from wind. I agree water probably was a part of the problem, but it wasn't the only problem. And I don't think that some insurance carrier should treat their policyholders like that, especially in an entire region that was decimated by a hurricane. But we've read about that just this year, you know, just in the last 12 months. So when we talk about what attorneys do, especially those that come before the People's Law School, I want to tell you, I'm going to read it to you a little bit. It's a very short thing. This was written by the Supreme Court in one of the states in the southern states. I think it was Georgia. It was written about 6 months ago. Written by one of the justices in that state. And he said this, and they were talking about insurance coverage and being able to enforce insurance coverage, things like that. This justice says, no right is more indispensable to you, meaning the injured person, than the right of access to our courts. It would be virtually impossible. It would be virtually impossible for an individual to protect himself or his family or to enforce his rights without open access to the court systems. And that's exactly the truth, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, we've got a magnificent court system. We need to keep the doors of that courthouse open to the public, because without the use of that court system when it's necessary, it is virtually impossible for someone that is being abused. It is virtually impossible for that person to protect himself or his family. And so when you hear criticism of our judicial system or our court system, please take into account that the entire reason it exists is to protect the public. You know, it's a magnificent part of our government. We're over 200 years old. I mean, we've got the finest and the greatest government and the court system in the history of the world. Don't let people tell you that it's not for your protection. Don't let people tell you that it's doing wrong things. I mean, it's protecting each and every person here, and each and every family deserves that protection, and without it, you are just, you are at the mercy of whoever you're dealing with. I can tell you that. You have no rights without the ability to seek protection as a member of the public, just like these employees that I've been talking about tonight. Okay? Now, that's kind of what I do and what I, you know, what my profession is like. And Alan and the People's Law School has asked me to speak to you about workers' compensation. And I want to tell you a few things. And remember when I first started speaking, I told you I wanted to talk about the workers' compensation from the perspective of an injured employee. All right, let me give you a few statistics. Last year, more than 560,000 people in the United States were disabled for more than 5 months. Okay? 100,000 of those people could not even go back to work without retraining. That'd be 1 in 5. And of course, Alabama is one of 50 states, so we've got a proportionate share of that. All right? Of those that do go back to work, and 70% ultimately go back to work, but of those that do go back to work, 1/3 of them lose their job within 1 year. 1/3 of the people that actually go back to work lose their job within 1 year. It's either because they can't do a good enough job and the company lets them go, they're unable to really do the job well, or the medical care keeps them from going there. A lot of reasons, but they lose their job within 1 year of returning to work. Those are pretty impressive statistics, I think, and it's something that shows you that the kind of injuries I'm talking about are severe and they're life-altering. You know, I mean, some of these injuries require 2 and 3 back surgeries. You know, we represent people that fall off of ladders 20 feet up and end up in a wheelchair. You know, we do some things that really helps people. You know, and we're not talking about, you know, even broke legs. We're talking about serious injuries here. And these people have been injured, and many of them have severe injuries, severe difficulties. And those that are treated fine, you know, that's quite good, and that's the majority of them. But there are those where the company breaches the trust, breaches the promises they've made to them, and I encourage those kind of people, those individuals themselves, to seek legal help, not to be in the 50% of people that never get an attorney. Okay? Now, let me give you some things that you need to know. There are pitfalls. You know, workman's comp has got some pitfalls to it. You know, and really it's just a knowledge game. If you have the knowledge, you won't fall into these pitfalls. For instance, when you're injured at work, the first thing you need to do is tell somebody that's a supervisor. Give them notice. That's called notice. I mean, tell them even if you don't think it's serious. Because I've had a number of employees that said, well, I didn't want to worry the boss, you know. I didn't think it was going to be serious. And a week or two later, you know, he kept on trying to work, but a week or two later, he's really, really, really badly hurt. They discover he's got a ruptured disc in his neck. He's going to have neck surgery. Now it's been a week or two since he was injured, and the company is suspicious of whether he hurt it at home or whether he hurt it at home or at the job. And so sometimes that creates a pitfall that the employee can solve just by saying to the supervisor, I was lifting this 50-pound weight and I felt some intense burning pain in my neck. I think I'm going to be all right, but I wanted to tell you about it right when it happened. So, you know, if some of your relatives have been injured at work and they didn't tell the boss, go home and ask them to call the boss or talk to them in the morning and be sure that it's reported on time. Okay? Now, Let me tell you some other things about workers' compensation. You don't have the right to choose your own doctor. You've got to go to the company doctor. Okay, they choose the doctors for you. You'll normally start off with a family doctor, a GP. The GP will check you out, and they might order some tests. If they find, you know, some abnormalities in the test, an MRI or something like that, they normally send you on to a specialized doctor. Most of the time, it's an orthopedic doctor or a neurosurgeon. They do most of the surgeries. All right. Workers' compensation says that the employer must pay for all of the medical care. They must pay for all the medical care as a result of this injury. And so that's their responsibility. They get to choose the doctor, but they have to pay for the doctor. If you're off work, now you can't just take yourself off work. The doctor's got to sign a piece of paper saying that you're off work because of this injury. If you're off work, you're entitled to receive compensation. And your compensation is 2/3 of your average weekly wage. So if you made $600 a week, let's just use some math. You made $600 a week gross income. The company has to pay you $400 a week during the time you're off work. Now, that's approximately what we all get anyway after we pay taxes. All right? You know, you know, it's not exactly the same, but it's close. And the idea here, is that a workers' compensation person can get his wages, the 2/3, and then get his medical care. So he ought to be able to keep his house. He ought to be able to keep his health insurance. He ought to be able to keep, you know, his car. Everything should ride along there pretty good. All right. The problems come up when they don't give you proper medical care. The problems come up when they don't give you that compensation on a timely basis and the man or his family gets behind. These are things I see pretty routinely in cases that come to our office. But if you get that during the period of time that you're having medical care and before you reach maximum improvement. Okay? Now, we talk about pitfalls. That's called temporary total disability. In other words, you draw it while you're temporarily disabled. Many times I see the numbers that are paid to injured employees, and those numbers are significantly too small. In other words, many times the company doesn't include overtime, the average that you're earning for overtime hours. They don't include your bonuses. They don't include different things like that that have a dramatic impact. I mean, I've represented people, and I'm sure a lot of attorneys that do this see this a lot. It's nothing unusual to see somebody work 10 hours a week overtime. Well, when you add 10 hours a week to your regular 40 hours, you know, that makes a big difference in your bring-home pay. And so you're entitled to 2/3 of that. That's another pitfall, is to be sure you're getting the right amount of check. All right? Now, once you have gotten as well as you're going to get, that's called when you've reached your maximum medical improvement, then the company owes you a settlement based on your ability, based on how the injury affects your ability to earn a living. So let's suppose you were injured, and before you were injured you were able to do this real heavy construction job, and you made $15 an hour. And a lot of guys do that, all right? But then you had a back surgery and you no longer can do the real heavy duty job. You can still work, but now you're going to work and you're going to make $8 or $10 an hour. You're going to have a significant decrease in your standard of living. And so is your family, you know? In other words, what I'm talking about here isn't just an average guy that doesn't have a family. What I'm talking about is the breadwinner of most of these households are the people that come to see me most often. All right? And so he's entitled to a settlement from workers' compensation, and it's based on his loss of earning ability. So if he could make $15 an hour before his injury, and after his injury, he could make, let's say he could make $10 an hour. He's lost 1/3 of his earning capacity. So you're entitled to 1/3 of your average weekly wage, actually 1/3 of 2/3, for the remaining period of 300 weeks that has not already been paid. The most you can receive in workers' compensation is 300 weeks, unless you're totally disabled. I'll come to that in just a moment. All right? And let me stop for a second. If we have some questions here, I'd be, yes, sir. Please help yourself.
I'm a little confused about maybe you were too kind to the companies by saying that in most cases they do the right thing.
Yeah.
When you actually think that even the 50 people who do not see a lawyer should do so, and those who do see a lawyer on the average make something like 3 times what
Yeah.
they got.
Yeah.
Doesn't this suggest that actually much more than
Well, it does suggest that, yeah. It does suggest that, but I'll tell you that in my practice, I do see companies that do the right thing. I do see that. But the statistics suggest pretty convincingly that if you've got a serious injury, you should not be taking care of yourself. All right? I mean, let me give you the analogy to that. If we had a really serious broken bone, would we go to a doctor or would we treat that ourselves? Well, I can't imagine any of us taking care of our own broken bones. We'd all go down to the emergency room, get that set, and see a doctor. Well, a back injury, and you're settling out on your legal rights yourselves, there's a strong likelihood that you're dealing with not very many facts, you're not dealing with nearly the facts the insurance adjuster has, and there's a good opportunity for them to breach that trust I told you about. In other words, trust is an integral part of insurance. I mean, when we pay our premiums and we have a claim, we trust them to do the right thing. And most every time, they've got a lot more facts and a lot more information, a lot more training than we as the policyholder have. Okay? So when they tell us that you're entitled to $5,000, many employees say, okay, I trust you and I take the $5,000. If they go to an attorney that specializes in this care, that attorney many times can turn that into 3 to 5 times what that offer is, and it's not very hard to do if you know what the standards are and what the roadmaps are that you need to go down. All right? And yes, sir.
In this regard to the $400 compensation this individual gets, you sort of implied that was tax-free.
It is tax-free. Yes, sir, it is tax-free.
Another question. What is the relationship between an injured employee and, say, the corporation, the state of Alabama, and the insurance carrier? Was the state involved in this at all?
Well, the state licensed insurance carriers, all right, in the state. I mean, we have the insurance department. We've got the Department of Industrial Relations. There are some people in Montgomery that have some control over insurance carriers, but they're not in the day-to-day business of helping injured employees take care of their own needs. They've got to do that themselves. In other words, they might help insurance carriers raise their rates when they get ready to get a rate increase, or they might make sure that the insurance carrier has enough money on their financial statement to pay their claims. They might make sure that the insurance carrier is not going to go bankrupt. But generally, and Alabama is one of the weakest regulatory states of the 50 states. We may be number 50, I don't know. If we're not, we're probably way down there. Our regulatory system on insurance carriers is weak, if non-existent. And so, again, I want to go back to you now. There's responsibility here. They've got the responsibility to do the right thing. You trust them to do the right thing. If you sense you're not getting that, you need to go get yourself some advice. And usually you can get advice for free. Lawyers will talk to you to see if they can help you without charging you a fee. So I encourage you, man. I encourage you strongly. If you got a serious injury, don't assume that everything you're told from the other side is always the truth. I can't say to you it won't be the truth. Sometimes it certainly is. But the statistics are just overpowering, So I would not be afraid to try to seek legal advice. Most every time it'll help you a lot. Any more questions? Yes, sir.
How long is it going to be before arbitration affects workers' compensation?
Boy, you've got a great question right there. Arbitration right now is not in workers' compensation, all right? And the reason for that is workers' comp is a state statute, okay? Arbitration applies only in contract situations. In other words, if you buy a policy from State Farm, let's say, that State Farm can put an arbitration clause in there. So if you have a claim against State Farm, you got to go to arbitration. You don't have the right to file a lawsuit. But as long as it's a state statute like workers' compensation is, you have the right to use our court system to protect yourself there.
So who's protecting the general population in these situations?
Where there's arbitration, I don't think anybody is. I mean, I think that this has been a vehicle by some of these that want to breach the trust they owe to the American public. It's an avenue for them to get out of paying a reasonable amount of money when there's a legitimate claim. Okay? That's what I think arbitration is. I think arbitration is one-sided. I think that the wealthy and the powerful get the ruling most of the time. And I think the general population, almost without exception, is ill-served, not served at all, if you've got to go to arbitration against somebody that's a major corporation. I mean, you almost every single time don't do well. First off, it's way too expensive. Secondly, they don't even have to follow the Alabama law. Thirdly, there's no appeal. You can't even appeal an arbitration award to the court. You know? I mean, you can't even subpoena somebody to an arbitration. If you want to see a document, unless you can talk them into showing you a document, you don't even get to see it. Arbitration is way one-sided, and our court system, starting about 10 years ago, approved arbitration. And every family in the United States is a loser based on that. Now, I'll tell you. And arbitration, I don't know how well or how wide you believe that it is. But I'll tell you, arbitration it's in every document that comes in the mail to you. Every credit card you deal with has arbitration on it. Every time you buy an appliance, every time you have anything like a pest control contract, a roofing contract, an automobile situation. I mean, it doesn't matter, hardly anything you touch today, the companies that are providing the service has built arbitration into their documents. So when you have a dispute with that company, your protection and your rights have been greatly diminished. Now, that's the way the world is today. And until that's changed in Montgomery and in Washington, D.C., you're going to continue to suffer ill effects from that horrendous system they call justice. It's no longer justice. It's just it's a leg up for the powerful. Yes, sir.
You said that the person could get 3 to 4 or 5 times more in settlement, but what are your fees?
15%. That's a really good question. The question is, what kind of legal fees do attorneys charge in workers' comp? It's 15% of whatever settlement you get, of whatever the attorney helps you get. If you've already gotten benefits up to a certain level, when you come to see the attorney, you don't charge 15% of that, but you charge 15% of what you help the injured employee receive. And it doesn't include medical care. It only includes the compensation for being out of work or for your disability. All right? Any other questions? And that's set by state statute also, please, sir. All right. Let me go forward and tell you a few more things about workers' compensation. People that are totally disabled from workers' compensation injuries, all right, they are not limited to 300 weeks. Remember, I told you the most you could get is 300 weeks if you go back to work or you're able to work at a smaller pay at a different job. All right, if you're totally disabled, you're entitled to get 2/3 of your average weekly wage for the rest of your life. And that can amount to, $300,000 or $400,000 depending on how old the person is. But if you get, let's suppose the person gets $400 a week for the next 25 or 30 years, you can easily see how the calculation there will amount to a lot of money.
Is that offset by Social Security?
Yes, there is an offset based on Social Security. And it's a complicated formula. It's called the 80% rule. Social Security and workers' compensation together cannot exceed 80% of what the person earned before he was injured. And so if you're getting, when you add those two together, workers' comp and Social Security, if it exceeds 80%, Social Security reduces their check to you. But you get the full workers' compensation check. Yes, sir?
Is there any kind of inflation index?
The question is there any inflation? Absolutely not. In fact, let me tell you, probably the worst law in Alabama in terms of workers' compensation is that if you're able to go back to work, even, making minimum wage, but you're not totally disabled, the most you're able to get is $220 a week, the most, for the remainder of the 300 weeks that you haven't been paid. So if you've been out for say 50 weeks, and you go back to work and you work only making minimum wage, but you were making $1,000 a week or something, then the most you can get is $220 a week. That has no inflation factor to it, and that has been set for more than 15 years without any changes. And so if that had just kept up with inflation, it would be above $300 today. And so what has happened here, ladies and gentlemen, is that workers' comp, while it gives you protection and you need to enforce your rights under that, it does not pay you for everything that has happened to you and does not make you whole. Even the people that are smart enough to get the maximum that they're entitled to under the Compensation Act will end up not getting a full recoupment of all the losses they have suffered. And that's just the way the world is in workers' compensation. Okay, but to prove total disability now, you can't even be able to do a really easy job. Like you couldn't, like taking up money at a cash register. You'd have to be so disabled you couldn't do that. Usually what it amounts to is that you can't lift very much to prove disability. You can't lift more than about 5 pounds on a consistent basis, or you must lay down some of the day because of the intense pain, or the medication has such side effects. We see a lot of this. The medication you take has such side effects that you cannot work because of the side effects. We see quite a bit of that. All right, but total disability is a tough animal to get to. But then that takes you though from the $220 a week and up to about $500 a week for the rest of your life. Big difference. Instead of limiting it to 300 weeks, which is about 6 years, you can get it for the rest of your life, which in many instances is 20 to 30 years based on, depends on how old the person is. All right? Now, there's a whole lot of different, there's a completely different set of rules if your injury is only to your arms or to your legs. That's called scheduled injuries. Okay? For instance, if you have an injury to your arm, I think the most you can get is 220 weeks. You couldn't get to 300 weeks. If you have an injury to your leg, the most you can get is 200 weeks. If you have an injury to your hand, it's 170 weeks. In other words, they've got about 40 different schedules that you go on depending upon what injured part of your body you have. And so, again, you need to take that into account when you see your lawyer. I see insurance carriers in some instances. A man's got an injury right there, let's say in the wrist area. The insurance carrier wants to pay you for 170 weeks, which is the hand. If they paid you for the whole arm, it'd be 220 weeks. Pretty big difference, So they argue, oh, well, it's right there on your hand, You're not entitled to the arm injury. Judges have no trouble with arm injuries like that. Don't let your friends and your neighbors get hoodooed. Get them some help. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit more about some of the things that we run into. Cumulative stress disorders. This came into play mostly in the textile industry, but now we're seeing it in the office industry, where people use their wrist thousands of times for sewing. And these nurses back here, they know all about that. They deal with it and have had all kind of people they have helped with cumulative stress. Usually it produces carpal tunnel syndrome, And you have to prove, though, that it came from the job. That's sometimes hard to do. That's also a pitfall for the employee. If a lady, let's just suppose a lady does a lot of sewing at home, you know, a lot of knitting or something like that, but she also does repetitive work where she moves that wrist thousands of times a day. The question is, where did the carpal tunnel come from? In other words, now, the laws in Alabama have been interpreted by the court system I'm talking about, they've been interpreted pretty good for an injured employee. So you don't have to prove that the work is the only thing that caused that carpal tunnel. All you have to prove is that work was a contributing factor. A contributing factor. So we're talking about the lady who did sewing, and we're talking about the lady who also did repetitive work. Probably both of them contributed to the development of carpal tunnel. And if that's the truth, and if you get a doctor to testify to that, you're entitled to workers' compensation if the work contributed to it. Okay? Now, let's talk about when you go back to work at the same job making the same money. This came about in 1992. Alabama's law was vastly amended in 1992. The insurance carriers at that time were claiming, oh, we're paying out too much in benefits, we need to reduce benefits, and sure enough, the legislature reduced them a lot. One of the groups of employees that suffered was a man or a woman that's able to go back to his or her same job making the same wages. If you're able to do that, you're not entitled to get workers' compensation based on how the injury affects your earning ability. You're only able to get a workers' compensation settlement based on what's called physical impairment. In other words, what kind of physical impairment do you have at that wrist? Not how the wrist affects your ability to work. It's physical impairment, not vocational impairment. There's a big difference in terms of the dollars. A big difference, okay? Now, let me tell you another pitfall. And I see this just about every single day. The medical profession, they have AMA guidelines on impairment ratings, okay? And like, for instance, if you have surgery here for carpal tunnel, they will usually give you maybe 5% medical impairment. Medical impairment, these terms are important, because you've had surgery. All right. The workers' compensation carriers, without exception, this is almost across the board, they say the 5% is all you're supposed to get because that's what the doctor said. Well, the law is so clear. I mean, this is where folks, you know, need some help, is that that's based on physical impairment, not medical impairment. What you're getting from a doctor is a medical impairment. You know, and it doesn't have a whole lot to do with physical impairment, although it's part of it. In other words, a judge will look at the medical impairment, but a judge will also look at other things, like, for instance, the pain factor. Most physical impairment cases from a doctor does not take into account the pain that a person experiences on a continuing basis. Okay? Now, let me give you the two scenarios on that. If you have surgery and you come out with no pain, you get 5%. If you have the same surgery and you come out with pain that's permanent and you have to take medication that's permanent, you still get 5% under the doctor's medical impairment guidelines. Well, judges are not bound by that. Most of them know the difference way before you get to the courthouse. You know, they've already gone down this field, down this road a whole lot, and so they'll give you more than the 5%. This is another area where employees sometimes don't have the knowledge to take care of themselves, and so I again encourage you to get some help if you or a family member has that kind of problem. Okay. Many times workers' compensation If they've got a 10% or a 15 or a 20% disability, and it calculates out to say $100 a week for the next 200 weeks, that'd be $20,000. They want to get it off their books. You know, they want to get it off their books. So they're willing to pay you a lump sum so they don't have to keep the records of it every week for 200 weeks. So they will what's called commute the benefits. They'll figure out the value of $100 a week for 200 weeks. They reduce it to by the 6% table, and they might pay you $18,300 or something in cash. So they are entitled to do that. And the employee most of the time is well advised to do it also. All right? Now, let's see. Let me talk to you. You know, I told you that your injuries to your hands is on a separate schedule. Well, if your pain is bad enough, now it has to be pretty severe. If you've got a serious injury to hands or to legs and you've got severe pain, disabling pain, a judge can give you total disability just with an injury to the hands. He's not scheduled, he's not limited to the schedule, all right? So, again, this is another area, pitfall for the employee. Don't always think that what the adjuster tells you is the max. I mean, I don't necessarily always think the adjuster is trying to mislead you. They're just trying to settle it for as little as they can get by. In other words, they're more or less graded on what kind of benefits they pay out. And so, you know, they don't want to go into their boss and say, oh, I told him, sure enough, the truth, and he was going to get another $10,000. You know, they'll just keep that secret. All right? I just got the high sign from the back there that my time is getting close. And I want to, as I said when I started, I love this organization. I love Huntsville, Alabama. I love the people that come here. I think this is the very best organization for a public service that lawyers in the state give in any other capacity. I think that the average person in our community is greatly served by this. I think the 2 million Alabamians that watch this on television, they learn things they otherwise wouldn't know. They're able to help protect themselves. And so I will ask you to remember, our court system is for you. Our court system is for your protection. You know, our court system is to protect the public. And so when you need it, use it. And I want to thank you very, very much for being here. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, as our first graduate, we have Ms. Alex Moquin. Alex, thank you so much for being here. She'll graduate in about a month.
Congratulations.
There you go. Would Gene and Gene Wiggins come up here, please? Let me tell you, Gene and Gene are my old dear friends, and they knew this graduation was coming along, and they're so educated. They've got more degrees than you could stand, and Gene was going to wear his cap and gown from one of his many professorial things. So, Gene, on behalf of the entire People's Law School, we'd like to present to you and to your wife, Jean, by the way, both Jeans, your diploma for the People's Law School, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Alan.
Where's Haley Martin? There you are, and your dad, George Martin. There you go. Well, I thought I had a system here. But Haley, have you enjoyed it?
Mm-hmm.
How old are you?
14.
Are you really? You are, I believe, the youngest person who's ever been to the People's Law School. Mr. Martin, thank you for bringing your daughter, and appreciate you. I hope you'll come again, Haley. Let's see, Sigrid Burge. Now, I didn't get you your tape, but I promise you I will. She's got several requests of particular tapes she wants me to get for her, and I will, by the way, and for the rest of you. If you need them, we'll get them. Just call my office later on. But thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me, and I enjoyed each and every night.
I enjoyed it too.
Thank you so much.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Let's see. Pamela Ebling-Belt. Pamela's daughter, by the way, is going to go to law school here directly, and I'm excited and she looks so much like you. Pamela, thank you so much.
Thank you. I enjoyed it immensely. It was, like I said, the best
$40 I ever spent. So.
Isn't that great? Thank you.
Thank you.